This is still Dream City on Unilag Radio 103.1 FM. Before the break, I mentioned that today we're looking at poetry and we're going to be having an interview with someone here in the studio who would help us to analyze some of these issues. So it is writing and selling poetry. That is what we're talking about on the show today. So I'll just go right into it. Let's get to meet our guest. So my guest is a writer, is a media consultant and an art curator. He's the author of 5 books of poetry. He was longlisted for the Babishai Niwe Poetry Foundation Prize in 2015 and was selected for the Writivism Poetry Workshop in the same year. He is also the author of Renegade. Renegade has been shortlisted for the 2019 Paris Adesorin Memorial Prize for Literature, selected amongst the 2019 Lagos Book and Arts Festival books, LABAF. I hope I got that right. And it's currently being translated to Portuguese. He has also curated art and culture projects for more than 10 years. He's married to a chef. They live on the edge of Lagos, Nigeria. On Gypsy today, I have with me Femi Morgan. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You're welcome to the show this morning.
Yeah, good morning.
So listeners at home, feel free, as we do always, if you have questions, you want to make comments, or you know Femi Morgan, you want to shout out to him, feel free to call the phone lines. I'll take the numbers again, 08133 038749, or you can call 0802 0933 638. My first question to you is, why poetry? Let's start with that.
I think that what genre you have worked and invested your life in is what you would do for a long time. So I started writing poetry at a very young age.
Tell us about it.
I started writing poetry when I was trying to set up a studio with a friend. A decent studio somewhere in Lagos, as far back as 1991. And we were trying to set up a studio. He was interested in music, I was interested in words, and he was also writing poetry at that time, but his poetry was more inclined to hip hop. And we tried to set up a studio, a decent studio, to see how we could do projects together. That studio never came to life, but we went from there to reading books and engaging poetry, engaging people like Odia, Ofiemo, people like Niyo Shundare, people like Hari Garuba. And I was very lucky because my father was an intellectual. He was an accountant in the daytime, was a reader and a good beer drinking friend of many in his nighttime.
Yeah.
So that time, I had the privilege of having people come home to see my father, people who worked in different spheres of life, having open and decent conversations about everything and anything, with my father. And a good eavesdropper that I am, I outgrew myself by listening to people talk about life, about sex, about food, about money, about government, about politics. I think I have a double-faced personality. I could talk for a long time. At the same time, I could get to a point in my life where I don't even feel like seeing anybody or talk to anybody. I just want to be in that. Yeah, I just want to be in that space. I don't want anybody coming in, just leave me. And I think my father understood the kind of person I am. So what he did was he filled my introverted moments with books and newspapers. When I'm in my introverted moment, there's an order from above: don't disturb him, he's reading. Don't disturb him, he's trying to draw, or he's trying to write, he's trying to do stuff. So that helped me a lot. My father finished from Yabatech and went to read in other places, but so he had books from China, he had Frantz Fanon, he had books from India, he had stuff. So he gave me access to all of his books, and all of that, can only be conveyed in codexes, that poetry affords.
Okay, now let's talk about childhood dreams and fantasies.
Yeah.
While growing up, we as children will have dreams of, oh, I want to be this, I want to be that, doctor, lawyer, accountant, or any of the big five, so to speak. What was being a poet part of what you wanted to do at an early stage? Let's say when you were 8, 10 years old or thereabout.
Yeah, I never wanted to become a poet. I never wanted to become a poet, but I knew I would never become a doctor.
Why?
Or an engineer, because I hated mathematics. I hated mathematics. I eventually came out with an A1 in mathematics.
Wow.
But that A1 was like everybody in the house was coaching me. And there was past questions from the day I was born. My father talked to his friend who was working in WAEC and got past questions from the day I was born. And being coached like that will help you in maths, at least. But I never had passion for maths, so anything that
you never liked it.
So anything that would make me cross paths with maths, I would dodge.
So, but was there any particular thing you thought you would be at that age? Did you have any dream, any fancy career?
Yeah. I wanted to be a politician.
Why?
Yes, I wanted to be a politician.
Because I think in those evening talks with your dad and friends influenced your decision, right?
Yeah, I wanted to become a politician because early in life I realized that both our personal and collective lives were affected by all these military men that were ruling us and all of these decisions that were made by our early post-colonial masters. And what I mean by early post-colonial masters was that whether you like it or not, all of these regional guys that did or led us sort of shaped the way we think now and how we hate one another. The Tafawa Balewas, the Awolowas, the Ziks, how the Igbo sees the Yoruba sees the Hausa. These guys shaped it, So those conversations, I wanted to become a politician. And so early in life, I began to, give attention to rhetoric. What people say, how people say things,
how they react to things.
Yeah. And that was what I wanted to be. But here I am.
The same way life happens to every one of us.
Yeah.
We just have to keep moving. Okay. Yeah. Now, tell me about your recent book. I know I mentioned Renegade in your profile, but you just told me before the show that there's a new one that came out this year. What's the name, and tell us about it?
Okay, it's called The Year of Fire. Okay. And The Year of Fire was put together during COVID-19 lockdown.
Interesting.
COVID-19 lockdown was a phase where both the introvert and the extrovert were in depression, because even the introvert realized that this solitude is too much.
It's too much.
And so that gave me ample time to write new works. Okay. And look at old works as well. So it gave me ample time to write new works and look at old works. So
the Year of Fire is a collection of poetry.
Yeah, it's poetry. It's poetry.
So what is it about?
So the Year of Fire is about chaos in the city, about COVID-19, about race, the African race, especially how we are often talking about racism outside of the continent, when in many ways we look down on ourselves, and I used the South African example to illustrate that in many of the poems. How, whether we like it or not, with all the contributions that we have made in the South African space pre 1994, the Ghanaian is in trouble, the Nigerian is in trouble, the Ugandan is in trouble, the Zimbabwean is in trouble, and all of that memories come to play at a time when I had ample time to really, really think, and write.
Okay. Now tell me about your first book. What was the first book you wrote?
I never knew that question would ever come to light.
But tell me about it.
My first book was a very small book, very tiny book called Silent Drummings. It was published in 2008. And in 2008, I was in Femi University. Okay. And I was not a serious student. I was on probation as early as 2008. I was almost getting out of school. And, but, we had read poems. We had talked about poems in class. We had begun to read all of this Victorian, Shakespearean, and all of that poetry. And a lot of us, felt that we could not match these guys.
Standards.
And I felt it was not about matching them. It was about putting your foot forward, and I wrote and through some partners published, the 2008 book in Ife, so it's like a college poetry book, and it really gained quite some very interesting traction. Lecturers began to summon me to their office, my classmates, my friends, my late grandfather who bought almost like 500 copies and shared to everybody. So I became like a college poet, also went to some schools to perform. So for me, the 2008 book was the beginning of many things to come.
Okay, but why did you choose poetry? Because for some people, a lot of writers, you see them writing other genres of literature. You see them do drama. You see them do prose. They write storytelling, narrative, and all of that. But there's a certain feel. Poetry is always different from this other. Okay, this is poetry.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to do poetry? Because sometimes I feel poetry is not as recognized in terms of the books now. In terms of writing a book now, it's not as recognized as we have with other genres. So what were your fears? You were not scared that, this collection of poetry I'm going to write, people may not accept it. People may not even understand it. People may not, the acceptance will be very, very low. What were your initial fears?
Okay, so my answer to that is that I'm an artist. And an artist does not think about the audience in the way that the average business strategist thinks about the audience. So when an artist is painting, it does not say, I'm going to use pink because they like pink nowadays. An artist is going to be immersed in a space and will produce his work, and then the work will speak for itself. That's the way the artist thinks. It's the business strategist that comes in and says, okay, you've used red, we can pitch it with Zenith Bank, we can pitch it with Union Bank. So those are two different realities for two different people. So for me, fiction sells more in the Nigerian literary space. Even plays, people don't read plays the way people read plays in the past, where we read Sizwe Banzi, where we read Fate of the Cockroach by Talib Alakim, where we read Uwakhonye. People don't read plays, except maybe you smuggle it into the schools. It's maybe you have a secondary school or something. People don't read plays.
I think I remember one. Our father has gone
mad again. Olarusumi. So you had all of that. You have all of that. But do playwrights stop writing plays because they don't get the kind of traction that fiction gets? No. And do poets write do they stop writing poetry because they want to move into fiction? No. Of course, there are poets who want to move into fiction, but it's not about moving into fiction. It's about giving your best in whatever genre that you find yourself. It's about giving yourself. Imagine when you say Ni Oshundare, do you say fiction? But when you place people on the roll call of great writers in Nigeria, Oshundare will be in the top 3. And it's not about fiction. But fiction sells more than poetry. So that is an answer to the question, why are you not writing poetry? Why are you not writing fiction? All of those genres, inspirational and all of that, they are all valid. But the questions that I ask people is, number 1, what are you saying? And number 2, what are you bringing to the table that is fresh? And let me add number 3, what stylistics are you bringing on board? So for poetry, stylistics is like the Godhead.
fact, we are going
You
to
know.
get to it. We are going to poetry these days is like a lot of big words, a lot of imagination. But let's go for this quick break.
Okay.
Let's pay some bills. When we come back, we'll take a look at other areas and
Yeah.
other issues. Stick around. Juicy will continue in a bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Hold on.
Easy banking, you can open a Zenith Bank account, purchase airtime and data, make transfers to any bank in Nigeria, pay bills and make POS payments. Create a wallet.
I did not know that you are going to talk to Zenith Bank when I said use red.
I know, right? I know you didn't know.
Of your
It was
account.
just in
Star
the mouth.
966 hash is fast, easy, and convenient. And more importantly, it can be used on any phone type as it requires no data. Dial star 966 hash to get started now. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
This is what happens when you open up a bottle of Fanta. It's bubbly excitement waiting to break free. It's living in the moment. It's not caring who's watching. It's putting your enjoyment first. It's adding color to the gray and making time to play. It's not taking life too seriously and adding the touch of crazy. Fanta is flavor. Fanta is laughter. Fanta is color. How are you going to color your day? Fanta. Color every moment.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, welcome back. This is still Dream City on New Live Radio 103.1 FM, and we still have our guest here, Femi Morgan, and we are still talking writing and selling poetry. The numbers to call 08133038749, or you can call 080-209-33638. Those are the numbers to call. Should you have questions, should you want to make comments, or you want to shout out to Femi Morgan, if you've read his piece, if you've read any of his work, feel free to call, and I'll be here to take your calls and your comments or questions. Now, back to what I said before the break. These days, poetry has a lot to do with imagination.
Yeah.
Okay, before we even go to imagine, let's talk about the words. When I hear people recite, when I hear poets recite, a piece, when they come on stage to do poetry, it sometimes sounds like a lot of big words. It sounds like, oh, I'm no longer in this world. I have been moved into another realm or something.
Okay.
So but what place? Where do you now place the KISS principle of keeping it short and simple? When you place it, and where do you place how poetry is being done in terms of the words, in terms of the language, in terms of grammar?
Poetry is not going to abide by keep it simple, except if the poet wants to keep it simple, except if the muse wants to keep it simple. Of course, I understand keep it simple, but poetry is not going to play that game, because it's like talking to your people. When a poet is done, he's really done talking to his people, and so think about Nnamdi Azikiwe on the stage. When Nnamdi Azikiwe was alive and well and was a politician, he was one of the best rhetorician in the country, and he was very popular in Lagos. So think about an Nnamdi Azikiwe talking to market women or talking to educated people. And think about him getting to a stage where he gets a roar or a clap, or and at that point, mentally, I don't think he would stop. Except he's really, really done with engaging that idea at that point in time. So keep it simple might be problematic. What I would advise people to do when they want to write poetry is that they should try as much as possible to carry people along. Carry your poet, carry the reader along, carry the audience along. And then if you have the audience in mind, I don't know if I'm permitted to use imageries that are somehow.
No.
So if you are in a copulation with your audience and then you are the only one enjoying it, then there's a problem.
So it has to be on both sides. It has to be
Yes.
from both parties. Okay, now let's look at your experience with writing poetry over the years. Now you've done this for years. I can't even calculate the number of years you've been doing this. Now, do you think it's more difficult to write poetry than to write other genres of literature?
It is more difficult to write poetry than to write other genres of
See
literature.
the way you just answered me. Why?
Because poetry is in levels. Fiction is in levels. And other genres of literature too, they are in levels. But even at the heights of culture and literature, poetry has an influencing factor on all other genres of literature.
Okay.
So at my level, which is not the same level with Tade Padiola or Niran Okewole or Jumoke Verisimo, I'm writing poetry. But I know that I read some poems, I read some works, Derek Walcott, and I'm like, I read Simos Hine, and I say, okay, I never start. You know, and you talk to even people who are higher up there, that you think that they are gods, the Odia of Femu and the rest, the New Oshundari, and they tell you that they are just starting. So it's a journey it's a marathon. Poetry is a marathon. Just start from where you are. Start from where you are. Learn, read, engage, learn, read, engage. And hopefully someone great will pass the baton to you.
You know? Would you say poetry can be learned in terms of writing it? So someone who doesn't have the skill, just like other genres, you can learn storytelling, you can be able to narrate. Can you do same for poetry, or is it an innate gift? Is it a gift one is born with? Like if you don't have it, you don't have it.
Poetry is a craft. It's not something that someone will lay his hands on you and then you will start writing poetry.
Receive it.
It will never happen. Poetry is a craft. But one of the major ways to know that you are a poet is that you must love words. You must love words. And in loving words mean that when someone is talking to you, you may just begin to see patterns of how the person talks. So poets are people who are mentally connected to patterns. Systematic patterns, internal rhyme schemes, internal what's that word? Internal nuances. Poets are interested in nuances. And those nuances can even extend to societal nuances. You see things happen every day in the corridor of your space or in your little space, and they have happened 4 or 5 times, and you're like, this is a pattern.
Yes.
Or you see someone behave in a particular way, or you see a group of people behave in a particular way, and then gradually you are drawn to that pattern, and then you ask yourself why. And then you ask questions, and then you read books, and then you reflect, and then you forget about it, and then poetry comes. So poets are drawn to patterns. So how do you learn the craft? You learn the craft by reading. You learn the craft by listening. You learn the craft by empathy, true empathy. Because if you are a poet and you do not care, you are not going to be a good poet. So you learn the craft by reading, by writing at your own level.
Irrespective.
Yes. Poor poets can turn to good poets. And then from there go to great poets. And then go to magnificent poets. And then turn to God poets. But what is important is that you write at your level. And then you learn from your level.
Okay, let's look at the role that imagination plays
Yeah.
when it comes to writing good poetry. Would you say that what's the relationship between a very imaginative person and writing poetry? Does it help that one has a very good sense or mind of imagination?
Of course, what you imagine is what you present. Poets are supposed to bring in words, a combination of words that have never been used, and they will still make sense. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
So, unlike fiction, where a story can be repeated and repeated and repeated in many ways, just spice it up a bit, it's still the same story.
Yeah.
It's still the same format in many ways, because I've read quite a lot like that and I'm tired. You know, you just see the story. Once by the time you reach the middle, you are like,
You already know the end.
I already know the story now. I think I read this story in another book, you know. But poetry challenges language, and that is why it is difficult. It challenges language. It says, why can't be predicate be the beginning of the sentence? Why can't complement start it? Why can't we just forget the now and move to, you know? So there are many.
There's one thing I don't like about poetry. What I don't like is those I don't like.
Oh, those ones are in another area.
I don't like.
I'm not going
those
to
things
discuss.
at
I'm
all.
not. But
It reminds me when I was reading Hamlet in school, and I saw a lot of that. And because it was compulsory, it was one of the books we had to read in school.
But do you know that there's a Nigerian writer who has translated Shakespeare to pidgin and has helped a lot of people understand what Shakespeare was saying? Yeah, this guy on Facebook, I've forgotten his name right now. So what is important is that beyond the imagination, you are also challenging language, you know, in ways that people will say, it be like, say, this guy don't colo. You know. So you have to.
So all those rules of grammar, all those rules, poetry breaks everything.
But you have to know them to break them.
True.
If you don't know them, you will not break them well.
Okay, hold on to that one. 08133 038749 0802093338. Let's go for this quick break, pay some bills, and when we come back, we're going to look at the money side of poetry. How do you market poetry? How do you publish your work? How do you sell? How do you make money from poetry? We're back after this break. Stick around, do not go anywhere. Okay.
Easy banking, you can open a Zenith Bank account, purchase airtime and data, make transfers to any bank in Nigeria, pay bills and make POS payments, create a wallet account, and perform other self-service options like PIN and password reset, and temporary blockage of your account. Star 966 hash is fast, easy, and convenient. And more importantly, it can be used on any phone type as it requires no data. Dial star 966 hash to get started now. Zenith Bank, in your best interest.
This is what happens when you open up a bottle of Fanta. It's bubbly excitement waiting to break free. It's living in the moment. It's not caring who's watching. It's putting your enjoyment
What's the
first.
Unilag FM, right?
It's adding color to the brain and making time to
103.1.
play. It's not taking life too seriously and adding a touch of crazy. Fanta
Let me
is
just post the
flavor.
picture of
Fanta
it.
is laughter. Fanta is color. How are you going to color your day? Fanta. Color every moment.
Alright,
Okay.
yeah, welcome back. It's still Dream City here on Unilag Radio 103.1, and we still have Femi Morgan here, and we have been talking, writing, and selling poetry. The numbers to call again: 08133038749, or you can call 08020933638. Those are the numbers to call to part of the show. Should you have questions, comments, you've read his work, you want to shout out to him, feel free. The numbers are open, and we'll be here to take your call. Now, before the break, we talked about, I said we're going to talk about how to market your work. How do you How do you sell it? How do you make money from it? So away from being able to write, now let's look at the sell part. How do I market it? Is there a market to poetry?
Poetry is a niche market. Now I'm beginning to become gentle. It's a niche market.
Okay.
And it's difficult to sell. And there's no need to lie about it, about the reality of selling poetry. So if you want to make good money in the Nigerian space, if your focus is to make money, please write inspirationals, write novels, write prose. But you also have to push it as well, even if you want to write all of those genres.
Yeah.
You understand? Okay, thank you. So write all of that. So the challenge with poetry is that it's niche. But even despite the fact that it is very niche, think about having to sell to 3% of Nigerians, we are 200 million.
Wow.
And you want to sell to just 3%.
3%.
And if you are serious with your marketing, you will reach those 3%. And then you would still make good money and good value, and then those 3% will keep engaging you. The guys who bought Renegade are the communities who are buying the Year of Fire. So if you build a community, you would always. So what is the difference between what you are doing and what Brimo is doing? And what Beautiful Nubia is doing? Because those guys produce the kind of music that is niche as well. But if you want to do fiction, you have a wider audience. If you want to do children's literature, you have a wider audience. You have even a very wide audience if you want to do children's literature. And there's nothing stopping you as a writer
from tapping into other
areas. Taking your energy anywhere you want to take your energy into, including politics, including social life, including
I think you still want
agenda
to be a
and all of
right?
that.
You still want to be a politician. You see how that's doing?
Not all right. Maybe in the next life,
Okay.
So, so the truth is that you have this talent, and this talent is so fluid that you can move it around. So
okay.
if
so
you want,
let's look at. Sorry to cut you, but let's look at publishing. Other genres of literature also have issues when it comes to finding the right publishing house to use, having to fund it, all of those issues. You still have it when it comes to publishing your work.
Okay, so like you said, you made it direct. Did I make it? Is it difficult for me to publish my work? It's not difficult for me to publish my work because I'm an investor in publishing firm that publishes my work.
Okay.
I have a publisher.
So, but for other people,
but I'm an investor in the project.
Okay.
So it's not difficult. And so other people must find ways, if they are serious about publishing, must find ways to get publishers. There are publishers in Nigeria. My publishing house is there. There are other publishing houses, But most important is that the process of publishing must be followed. So you have to get experienced hands to do the editing, to do the proofreading. You have to sit down with the branding, not book cover, branding. Because branding is different from just designing anything. Just putting. There's a thought process to how you put together the book cover. There's a thought process, and then you have to have a team that will push your work shamelessly. You have to be shameless about carrying your books around. I really, when I talk to my publisher is younger than I am. He's in Ibadan. His name is Shogofaloye. When I talk to my publisher is going to a place. He has a backpack. He has my books in it. He's moving. Many publishers want to be cool. They want to be in the AC and just live like, fresh guys and come out once in a while and say publisher. A publisher is a marketer. And so a publisher has to be shameless about selling the book.
Okay. Now, are people happy to pay for poetry? Are people happy to spend to pay for your book, pay for poetry, any work of poetry? Or let's say, okay, you're invited to come do a stand-up, you're invited to come talk as a poet, make a rendition or something.
Yeah.
Are people happy to pay for that service?
My answer is that there are poets who make more money than I do. And if it's about money, I wish to make more money than they do. There are people who get offers to do performances in churches, in places of great audience. There are people who have performed. In spaces with the vice president, with the president of this country. There are people who have performed abroad, who get grants and per diems, and who also sell their books. And so the book is like a merchandise after performance. And people are like, oh, how can I get your autograph? I've gotten some of that, but I want more of that. And I'm not going to be shy about it because I'm shameless. You have to be shameless. When you get to marketing, you have to be shameless about pushing yourself. You have to be in people's faces. You have to go to spaces. You have to perform. You have to do crazy things, because once you are out of that space of creating, you have to be in that space where you are promoting yourself and pushing yourself. Shameless.
Now, you talked about having a community.
Yeah.
How does one get to build this community? And are there other communities for poets that young poets can be part of?
Okay, I'll give you a very clear example of a community. There's a friend of mine, his name is Rez the Poet. He has a community called Groits and Bards. And that community, what they do is that they bring a lot of people come into a space. They listen to good poetry, they listen to good music, and they get to talk openly about social issues. That community is growing. The project started last 2 years, or was it last year? Last year, before COVID, so you could say 2 years. COVID was. That community is growing, and that community has a potential to not only create profit, because it is not only about money, it is also about value. It's about having people. This is one thing I learned from my father. My father has never been in a police issue in his life. Why? Because he has a community. You do anyhow, a phone call away. So build your community, build your community, build your community. That's the answer.
So you start with your own immediate community and build.
Yes, build your community.
Yeah. Okay. Now they say time goes when you're having fun. Let's wrap this up. So final thoughts on this, on writing and selling poetry.
Yeah. Please write good poetry. Poetry will frustrate you if you don't write good poetry. You will abandon poetry eventually if you don't write good poetry. But if you write good poetry and you treat the book or the material as a child, you release it into the world. You allow the critics to tear it apart. You allow the people who love it to love it. Just like a child. You allow people to interpret it the way they want.
Yeah.
You will begin to get the kind of projects and ideas that you want. Build a team. It could be a team of 5, and all of them should not be artists. Let one of them have a very serious business sense, so that when you are thinking as the artist, there's someone thinking as a business person. There's someone looking at the work, looking at your what you have written from the angle of business, looking at how to pitch it, writing the proposals and doing the work, so that you can be the artist and that person can be the marketer and business person.
So to summarize that, don't do it alone.
You can't do it alone.
Interesting.
Every great writer, musician, artist, check them out.
They don't do it alone.
They might be the face but they have a team.
Right. Thank you so much, Femi
Yeah.
Morgan, for coming on. You didn't tell us where to get your books. Just in case
So
our
you
listeners-
could get my book on www.baronscafe.com. That's like the publisher's website. You could also get it in bookstores, Roving Heights. You could get it in Pataba. You get it in the UI bookstore. You could go to OAU bookstore if you are far away. You could get it. Okay, I've talked about Lagos already. Roving Heights, Pataba are the trusted hands in Lagos to get my book. You could order it online. Just type in The Year of Fire, Renegade, Whispers, and all of that.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Femi, for coming on the show today. I had a good time talking to you about poetry. Interesting. To our listeners at home, thank you for tuning in, and to those who won airtime during the quiz segment. Shout out to who now? Shout out to Manasi from Yaba. He answered 5 questions correctly. You will get your airtime very soon. And also shout out to Kayode. Kayode answered 4 questions correctly, so you'll also get your airtime very soon. Thank you so much, and you guys have a beautiful weekend. Remember, Dream City was brought to you by Young and Cerebral. Do have a fabulous weekend. All right. Thank you. We're done here. No, just sit down. We're not done. No, you need to sign. You need to help me play, fill out some forms. A form,
Okay.
rather.
So, how do I get this video? How do I get the recording?
I'm coming. Just give me a minute.
Create a wallet account and perform other self-service options like PIN and
So fill
password
this
resets
first.
and temporary block.
While you're filling this, I'll send you the link to this. Thank you.
And more importantly,